Buying a house had been my biggest dream since I was a teenager. I grew up in a small, cramped apartment with my parents and younger sister, where privacy was a luxury we couldn't afford. Every night, as I lay on the fold-out couch in the living room, I imagined a place of my own, four walls that belonged only to me, a quiet space where I could be free. After years of working two jobs, saving every penny and sacrificing vacations, I finally did it. At 32, I bought a modest but cozy house on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine. A place where I could start fresh, build a future, and maybe one day raise a family. I should have known my happiness wouldn't last. The day I got the keys, my parents came over not to celebrate but to criticize. "This is what you spend all your money on," my mother scoffed as she walked through the living room. "It's so small. And the kitchen, too old-fashioned. You should have asked us before making such a big decision." My father, usually a quiet man, just sighed and shook his head. "You always do everything on your own. No respect for family." I swallowed my frustration. I had expected them to be unimpressed. Nothing I ever did was good enough in their eyes, but I hadn't expected what came next. "You should sign it over to your sister," my mother said suddenly, as if it was the most logical suggestion in the world. "She needs a home more than you do." I stared at her in disbelief. "What?" "She's getting married soon," she continued. "They don't have enough money for a house, and renting is expensive. It makes sense. You're single. You can buy another place later." I laughed, thinking she was joking. But she wasn't. I refused, of course. The house was mine. I had worked for it, suffered for it. My sister Anna had never held a full-time job for more than a few months. She lived at home, and my parents spoiled her, covering her expenses while she spent her days on social media. If she wanted a house, she could earn it like I did. That conversation ended in a screaming match. My mother accused me of being selfish. My father called me ungrateful. Anna, standing in the doorway, just watched with wide eyes, not saying a word. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I received court papers. My own parents were suing me. They claimed that since I had lived in their home for over 30 years, I owed them compensation. They demanded that I either pay them a large sum, more than half of my savings, or legally transfer ownership of my house to Anna as repayment for their investment in my life. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Chapter 4. The Court Battle. I hired a lawyer, though part of me couldn't believe it had come to this. The case was absurd. But my parents had gathered every little thing they had ever done for me and twisted it into evidence. They even claimed that my father had given me money to buy the house. An outright lie. The trial dragged on for months. My parents painted me as a heartless son who abandoned his family. In court, my mother sobbed about how they had sacrificed everything for me. My father sat silently, shaking his head as if disappointed beyond words. Anna finally spoke in the final hearing. "I never wanted this," she said softly. "I just wanted us to be a family." It was the only honest thing said in that courtroom. The judge ruled in my favor. My house remained mine. But my victory felt hollow. My parents cut me off completely. They told the entire extended family that I had betrayed them. My phone stopped ringing, invitations stopped coming. I was alone. I sometimes wondered if I had made the wrong choice. Would it have been easier to give in? To let them have what they wanted? But then I would wake up in my own bed, in my own house, and remember, I had fought for this. And I wasn't sorry. After the court ruling, my house became my sanctuary, but also my prison. The silence weighed on me. No more family visits, no more messages from cousins or aunts. It was as if I had been erased from their world. First, I told myself it didn't matter. I had spent years being the outsider in my own family, constantly told I was too independent, too selfish for wanting to live my own life. But being completely alone was different. Then came the unexpected messages. One night, a text from Anna lit up my phone. "Anna, I'm sorry." That was it. Just 2 words. No explanation. No follow-up. I stared at the screen, debating whether to respond. After everything, did she deserve my forgiveness? I wasn't sure. So I left the message unanswered. A week later, she texted again. "Anna, they don't talk to me either now. They blame me too." That got my attention. I hesitated, then finally replied. "Me? What do you mean?" Her response came instantly. Anna, can we meet? I wasn't sure I wanted to, but curiosity won over. We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown, neutral territory. When I arrived, she was already there, stirring a cup of coffee with shaking hands. She looked exhausted, thinner than I remembered. I sat across from her. So talk. She exhaled, avoiding my gaze. They hate me now too. I frowned. Why? She hesitated, then said, because I didn't fight harder for the house. I let out a bitter laugh. So they expected you to sue me too? Anna nodded. They think I should have pressured you more. That I should have, I don't know, done something. She rubbed her forehead. But I didn't want it, okay? Not like that. I never asked for this. I studied her, trying to figure out if she was being honest. I had spent so long thinking of her as the spoiled princess of the family. Had I been wrong? Finally, I said, so what do you want from me, Anna? She looked up. Nothing. I didn't want to lose my brother over this. Something in my chest tightened. A part of me wanted to push her away, to remind her that she had stood by while our parents tried to take everything from me. But another part, one I had buried deep, remembered the little sister who used to sneak into my room when we were kids, scared of thunderstorms. Maybe I wasn't ready to forgive her completely, but maybe, just maybe, I could start. I don't know if we can go back to how things were, I admitted. But maybe we can figure out how to move forward. For the first time in months, I saw her smile. Rebuilding my life wasn't easy. I had spent so long fighting to keep my house that I hadn't thought about. What came next? I started making changes, small ones at first. I painted the walls, changed the furniture, made the space feel more like me. I started inviting friends over, filling the house with laughter and warmth. One evening, as I stood on my front porch watching the sunset, I realized something. This house wasn't just a building. It was proof that I had fought for myself, that I had chosen me for the first time in my life. And I wasn't going to regret that. Months passed and I slowly adjusted to my new life, one without my parents, but with a growing sense of independence. My relationship with Anna remained fragile, like glass that had cracked but not yet shattered completely. She visited occasionally, always hesitating at the door, as if unsure whether she was truly welcome. I never said no, but I never fully embraced her either. The scars were still fresh. Then one evening everything changed. Anna showed up at my house unannounced, her face pale and her hands trembling. They're trying again, she said. I frowned. What do you mean? She swallowed hard. They found another way. They're challenging the court's decision. They're saying you used their money to buy this house and that you committed fraud. My blood turned to ice. That's ridiculous. The court already ruled in my favor. I know, she whispered. But they're desperate. And this time they have a new lawyer. A good one. Anger boiled inside me. Just when I thought I was free, they were dragging me back into their twisted game. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Anna hesitated, then looked me in the eye. Because I don't want them to win. I met with my lawyer the next day. They don't have a case, he assured me. But that doesn't mean they won't try to make your life miserable in the process. And they did. They spread lies to the family, telling everyone I had stolen from them. They tried to contact my employer, making vague accusations about my character. They even went to my neighbors, warning them that I was a fraud. First I was furious. Then I realized something. They were losing control over me, and they couldn't stand it. The case dragged on for months. My parents dug up every financial record they could find, twisting every fact to suit their narrative. They even brought in fake witnesses, distant relatives who barely knew me but were willing to lie for money. But the truth was on my side. The judge dismissed their claims, calling them baseless and vindictive. My parents left the courtroom humiliated, their last desperate attempt to control me shattered. It was finally over. Chapter 10. Letting go. After the final ruling, my parents disappeared from my life completely. No more lawsuits. No more messages. Nothing. At first, the silence felt strange. For so long, I had been fighting them that I didn't know what to do with my freedom. But then I realized I didn't need them anymore. I had my home, my life, and I had people who truly cared about me. Not because they wanted something, but because they valued me. Anna still visited, though less frequently. She was trying to rebuild her own life, away from our parents' influence. And though I wasn't sure we would ever be as close as before, I knew one thing. I wasn't alone anymore. Standing on my porch one evening looking at the house I had fought so hard for, I finally let out a deep breath. For the first time in my life I felt free. And that was worth everything. Winning the court battle gave me peace, but it didn't erase the wounds left behind. The betrayal of my parents, the exhaustion of fighting for what was rightfully mine. It all lingered in the back of my mind. For a while I threw myself into work. My job became my escape, a distraction from the emotions I wasn't ready to face. I worked late hours, took on extra projects, and spent weekends buried in emails. But at night, when the house was quiet, the loneliness crept in. I had won my freedom. Now I had to figure out what to do with it. One evening, as I was fixing a broken fence in my backyard, I heard a voice behind me. You know, if you tighten that bolt too much, you'll crack the wood. I turned to see a woman standing there, holding a small bag of groceries. She looked to be around my age with sharp brown hair and sharp green eyes. I had seen her before. She lived a few houses down, but we had never spoken. I didn't know that, I admitted, stepping back. She smiled. You're new to fixing things, aren't you? More like new to having a house to take care of. She shifted the grocery bag in her arms. I'm Lena, by the way. I live in the blue house on the corner. I wiped my hands on my jeans and extended one. Alex. She shook it, then glanced at the fence. If you need a hand, let me know. I've had to fix enough things in my own house to know what not to do. I chuckled. I might take you up on that. It was a small moment, but it stayed with me. After so much isolation, after so much fighting, a simple conversation with a stranger felt good. Over the next few weeks, I started seeing Lena more often. Sometimes we ran into each other while taking out the trash or walking to our cars. Other times she would stop by while I was working outside, offering unsolicited but usually helpful advice. Then one evening she showed up with 2 beers. You looked like you needed a break, she said, handing me one. I hesitated for a moment, then accepted. You have no idea. We sat on my porch watching the sun set over the rooftops. So, she said after a while, why does a guy like you end up fixing fences alone? No friends? No family? I took a sip of my beer, debating how much to tell her. My family isn't in my life anymore, I finally said. Long story. She didn't push. Must have been a pretty bad story. I let out a dry laugh. You could say that. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Then she said, I did it. My parents cut me off when I decided to move out and stop following their plan for me. Ich glanced to heal. Yeah. Tishi nodded. They wanted me to marry a nice, responsible man and settle down. Instead, I bought my own house, started my own business, and now they act like I don't exist. I exhaled. Sounds familiar. She smiled slightly. Then maybe we're both better off without them. For the first time in a long while, I thought, maybe she was right. Days turned into weeks, and my life slowly started to change. I spent less time drowning myself in work and more time living. I reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with during the court battle. I started inviting people over, filling my house with laughter instead of silence. And Lena? She became a constant presence in my life. First, we were just neighbors who happened to talk. Then we became friends. And then something more. It wasn't sudden. There was no dramatic confession, no whirlwind romance. Just small moments that built into something real, late-night conversations on the porch, shared meals, stolen glances that lasted a little too long. One evening, as we sat on my couch watching an old movie, she leaned her head against my shoulder. I like this, she murmured. I glanced down at her. What? She smiled. Not being alone. I didn't say anything, but I squeezed her hand, letting her know I felt the same way. 1 year after my parents tried to take my house, I stood in my backyard, looking at everything I had built. The fence was finally fixed. The garden was growing. The house, once just a symbol of my fight, had become something more. It was my home. Lena stepped up beside me, her hand slipping into mine. You did good, she said softly. I looked at her, then back at the house. Yeah, I said. I think I did. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. And for the first time ever, I was truly happy. Life was finally settling into something good. Work was steady, my home felt like my own. And Lena was becoming an important part of my life. But just when I thought the past was behind me, it found a way to creep back in. One evening, as I was locking up for the night, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Unknown, we need to talk. I frowned, about to ignore it, but something in my gut told me to check. Me? Who is this? A moment later, the reply came. Unknown, Dad. A cold wave washed over me. It had been over a year since I had seen or spoken to my parents. After the final court ruling, they had cut me off completely, and I assumed that was the end of it. Now, out of nowhere, he was reaching out. I debated whether to respond. I had fought so hard to escape their control. Was I really willing to open that door again? Finally, I typed back. Me, what do you want? His response came quickly. Dad. It's about your mother. She's sick. I sat staring at the screen, my mind racing. A part of me wanted to delete the message, to pretend I had never seen it. They had tried to destroy my life. They had dragged me to court, tried to steal my home, turned our entire family against me. They had made it very clear that I was no longer their son. But another part, one I hated to admit existed, felt something else. Concern. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I told Lena about it that night as we sat on the porch. She listened quietly, then asked, Do you want to see her? I sighed, rubbing my face. I don't know. After everything they did, I don't owe them anything. But at the same time, she's still your mother, Lena finished. I nodded. Then maybe, she said carefully, you should see her, not for them but for you. The hospital was quiet when I arrived. I hadn't told my father I was coming. I wasn't sure I wanted to see him yet. Instead, I asked at the front desk for my mother's room and walked there alone. When I stepped inside, I barely recognized her. She looked smaller, frail, her skin pale against the white sheets. Dark circles lined her eyes, and her once perfectly styled hair was now dull and unkempt. She turned her head slightly, her gaze landing on me. For a moment there was no recognition. Then her eyes widened. Alex. Her voice was weak, barely a whisper. I swallowed. Yeah. It's me. She blinked as if trying to process the fact that I was really standing there. Then, to my surprise, her eyes filled with tears. I didn't think you'd come, she admitted. I shifted uncomfortably. I almost didn't. Silence stretched between us, thick with everything left unsaid. Then she whispered, I'm sorry. Istata here. Of all the things I had expected her to say, that was not one of them. For what? I asked cautiously. For what we did to you, she said, her voice trembling. For trying to take your home. For trying to control you. We thought we were doing the right thing. We thought we were helping Anna. But we were wrong. A lump formed in my throat. Why are you telling me this now? Because, she breathed. I don't know how much time I have left. And I didn't want to go without making things right. I didn't know what to say. Was this what I had been waiting for? An apology? An acknowledgement of everything they had done? I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that she had truly realized the damage they had caused. But I also knew that one apology couldn't erase years of hurt. So I said the only thing I could. I don't know if I can forgive you. Tears slipped down her face, but she nodded. I understand. I looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't the strong, commanding woman who had tried to control my life. She was just a person. A sick, frail woman who had made mistakes. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger toward her. Just sadness. I sat down beside her bed and sighed. But I'm here. She reached for my hand hesitantly, as if expecting me to pull away. I didn't. And for the first time in years, we sat together not as enemies but as something closer to what we once were. A week later, she passed away. I didn't expect to feel much when I got the call, but I did. Not grief exactly, but a quiet, heavy kind of sadness. Not for what was lost, but for what had never been. My father was at the funeral, but he barely looked at me. Anna, however, stood beside me the entire time. Silent support in the storm of emotions. After the service, she turned to me. Do you regret going to see her? She asked. I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. No. I think I needed it. She nodded, then hesitated. And Do you think there's any chance of making things right with Dad? I sighed. I don't know. Maybe. But I'm not going to chase after him. She smiled sadly. I get that. We stood there for a moment, then she asked, so what now? I exhaled, looking up at the sky. Now? I live my life. On my terms. She nodded. That sounds like a good plan. Epilogue home. Always. Months passed. The world moved on. My father never reached out again. Maybe he never would. But that was okay. I had made my peace. Anna and I grew closer, rebuilding what we could of our relationship. And Lena? She stayed by my side through it all. One evening, as we stood on my porch watching the sunset, she nudged me. So, after everything, do you still think it was worth it? I looked at my house, the home I had fought so hard to keep, the home that had nearly torn my family apart, but had ultimately given me a new beginning. I smiled. Yeah, I said. It was worth it. And this time I knew it was true. Life after my mother's passing settled into something resembling normalcy. My father remained a ghost in my life, neither reaching out nor acknowledging my existence, and I had no desire to force a reconciliation. Anna, on the other hand, stayed close. We weren't the same siblings we had been as kids. We were two people trying to rebuild something fragile. But we tried. That was enough. Lena, as always, was my rock. She had been there through my worst moments, through the battles and betrayals, and now she was there for the quiet moments too. The simple joys of a life that was finally mine. One evening, as we sat on the porch, sipping wine and watching the stars, she turned to me with a thoughtful look. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? She shrugged. You fought so hard to keep this house. But now that you have it, is it really where you want to stay forever? I blinked, caught off guard. I had spent so long defending my right to this home that I had never stopped to consider why I was holding on to it so tightly. I don't know, I admitted. She smiled. Then maybe it's time to figure that out. Over the next few months, the thought lingered in my mind. Did I love this house? Or had I simply refused to let it go because of what it represented? I had fought so hard to keep it, but maybe my battle had never really been about the house at all. Maybe it had been about proving to myself that I deserved something of my own. And now that I knew I did, maybe I didn't need these four walls to remind me anymore. One afternoon I made a decision. I listed the house for sale. Anna was shocked. After everything you went through to keep it? I nodded. Yeah. And that's exactly why I'm ready to move on. She didn't argue. She just hugged me. The house sold quickly. I expected to feel regret, sadness, maybe even fear. But when I handed over the keys to the new owners, I felt something else entirely. Relief. Lena and I packed our things and moved into a new house, one we picked together. It wasn't about fighting for ownership or proving a point. It was about building something new. Something that was ours from the start. One evening, as we stood in the doorway of our new home, she grinned at me. So? Do you regret it? I looked around, breathing in the scent of fresh paint and possibility. No, I said with certainty. Not at all. She smiled, taking my hand. Good. Because this time we're building something together. And for the first time in my life, I knew I wasn't alone. I had won my battle. But more importantly, I had finally found peace. Starting over in a new home felt different this time. There was no tension, no court battles looming over me, no past weighing me down. It was just life, normal, simple, and finally mine. Lena and I spent the first few weeks making the house our own. Painting walls, rearranging furniture, arguing over whether a kitchen island was necessary. She won. It was the kind of mundane happiness I had never thought I would experience. Anna visited often. She seemed lighter too, as if my decision to let go of the past had given her permission to do the same. She had finally moved out of our parents' house and was renting a small apartment downtown, working a steady job. I thought Mom and Dad would be furious when I left, she admitted one evening as we sat on the porch of my new home. But honestly, I don't think they even cared. I frowned. Still no word from Dad? Tishi shook her head. No. And I'm done waiting. She looked at me, a soft but determined expression on her face. We both spent too much of our lives chasing after their approval, Alex. I don't want to do that anymore. I nodded, proud of her. Neither do I. Months passed and life continued. I built something real with Lena. Anna grew into her independence. The past became a distant memory, something I had survived rather than something that defined me. Then one evening my doorbell rang. When I opened it, I was met with a face I hadn't seen in nearly 2 years. My father. He looked older, more tired. The stern, controlling man I had known all my life was gone, replaced by someone smaller. For a long moment we just stood there. Then he exhaled and said, "I heard you sold the house." I nodded. "Yeah, I did." He looked down, nodding slowly, as if processing the weight of that decision. After another pause he asked, "Can I come in?" I hesitated. Every instinct told me to say no, to protect the peace I had built. But another part of me, the part that had once been a son, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was a conversation I needed to have. So I stepped aside. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Cool mean." We sat at the kitchen table, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally he sighed. "I know I wasn't a good father to you. I didn't say anything. I wanted control over everything," he admitted. "Over you, over Anna, over Mom. I thought that was what a father was supposed to do, make decisions for his family. But I see now that I pushed you away." I crossed my arms. "You didn't just push me away. You tried to destroy me." He flinched but nodded. "I did." I studied his face, searching for signs of manipulation, of the man who had once taken me to court over my own house. But he looked different. "I didn't come here expecting forgiveness," he said. "I just wanted to see you. To see if you were happy." I thought about my life now. The house that was mine, not just in ownership but in choice. Lena. Anna. The quiet, fulfilling life I had built for myself. "I am," I said. He nodded, exhaling deeply. "Good." Silence fell between us. I had spent so much time hating this man, resenting him, wishing he would come back just so I could tell him to go to hell. But now that he was here, I just felt tired. I didn't know if I could forgive him. Maybe I never would. But I did know one thing. I wasn't that scared, desperate son anymore. I was free. And no one could take that from me again. My father left that night without asking for anything. No favors, no second chances, no grand gestures. Just a quiet goodbye. Maybe that was all we would ever have. And maybe that was okay. Because as I closed the door behind him and turned back to my home, I realized something. This was my life now. And I was finally living it on my terms. Lena stepped into the kitchen, watching me carefully. "You okay?" I turned to her, letting out a slow breath. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." She smiled, reaching for my hand. "Good. Because we have a life to live." I squeezed her hand, nodding. And with that, I finally moved forward. Even though my father had left without demanding anything, his visit stayed with me. I told myself it didn't matter, that I had moved on, that I was free. But late at night, when the house was quiet and Lena was asleep beside me, I caught myself thinking about him. Had he truly changed? Or was this just another attempt at control disguised as remorse? One evening as I was locking up the house, my phone buzzed. A message from Anna. "Anna. He came to see me too." I hesitated, then typed back. "Me and Anna, I don't know. He seems different. Tired. Alone." I exhaled. "Me? What do you want to do?" A long pause. Then, "Anna, I think I want to meet with him again. Just to talk." I stared at the message, my emotions tangled. Part of me understood. Another part, the part that still carried the wounds he had inflicted, wasn't sure I was ready for the same. Chapter 29. A test of forgiveness. A week later, I found myself sitting across from Anna at a cafe, stirring a cup of coffee I didn't really want. "You look stressed," she observed. I sighed. "Just thinking." She tilted her head. "About Dad?" I nodded. "I don't know if I want him back in my life." Anna didn't try to convince me. Instead, she shrugged. "Then don't force it. Maybe just see where it goes." She paused, then added, "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means letting go of the weight." I let her words settle in my mind. Maybe she was right. I didn't reach out to my father right away. But I didn't ignore him either. Instead, one evening I sent him a message. "Me dinner. This Friday. If you want to talk, come." No promises. No expectations. Just a chance. When Friday came, I set the table for three: Lena, Anna, and me. I wasn't sure if my father would show up. I wasn't even sure I wanted him to. But at exactly 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, looked at Lena, and she nodded. Then I walked to the door and opened it. I hesitated for a moment before opening the door. A part of me still expected my father to be the same man who had tried to take everything from me. The man who had stood in court, cold and unyielding, demanding that I hand over my house. But the man standing in front of me now wasn't that person. He looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of his own choices had finally caught up with him. "Hi," he said quietly. I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked in slowly, looking around. It wasn't the house, the one we had fought over. It wasn't filled with memories of the past. This was my home, one he had never set foot in before. Lena was setting plates on the table, and Anna sat with a glass of water in front of her, watching our father carefully. She gave me a small nod as if to say, "We'll get through this." "Dinner's ready," Lena said, her voice warm but cautious. My father cleared his throat. "Thank you." We sat down, the silence stretching between us. It was strange, sitting at a table with him again after everything that had happened. Finally, I broke the silence. "So, why did you come?" He sighed, running a hand over his face. "Because I wanted to." I waited, letting him struggle with his own words. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. "I don't know how to fix things," he admitted. "I don't even know if I can fix them. But I do know that I don't want to spend the rest of my life pretending I don't have a son." His words sat heavy in the air. Anna glanced at me, waiting to see what I would say. Lena stayed quiet, her hand resting lightly on my knee under the table. A silent reminder that I wasn't alone. I leaned back in my chair. "You didn't just lose a son, Dad. You threw me away. You took me to court, tried to ruin my life, made me the villain in front of our entire family. And now, after all that, you just want to talk." He flinched but didn't argue. "I know," he said. "And I can't undo it. But I can try to be better now." Dinner was awkward, but we managed. Conversation was slow, mostly led by Anna, who tried to bridge the gap between us. My father didn't ask for anything. He didn't try to justify his actions. He just talked. About his life now, about my mother's last days, about the regrets he carried. I didn't forgive him that night. Maybe I never would. But I listened. And when he left, I didn't feel anger. Just exhaustion. And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of peace. In the weeks that followed, my father didn't push. He didn't call constantly or demand anything from me. Instead, he let me decide when and if I wanted to speak. And little by little, we started talking. Nothing deep, just small things. A text here, a short phone call there. I still didn't trust him completely. But I was learning that maybe, just maybe, we didn't have to go back to what we were. Maybe we could build something new. Not as father and son. Just as two people trying to be better than they were before. Epilogue. Home is more than a house. One evening, Lena and I stood outside watching the sunset. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." She smiled, slipping her hand into mine. "So what's next?" I exhaled, thinking about everything that had happened, the battles, the betrayals, the years of fighting for my own space, my own freedom. Then I looked at her. At the house we had built together. "I think," I said, squeezing her hand, "that I'm finally home." And for the first time in my life, I meant it.